So we have just a little bit to finish talking about on our notes here. Oh, so just grab it later and then we'll just correct it up later. Okay, so yesterday when we were talking about our fires, remember we talked about, water that would go on a grease fire. It's going to go underneath, water evaporates, that grease spreads out very, very quickly. So a couple additional key pieces to this. We want to make sure that you have a fire extinguisher handy. Here in the classroom, it's straight back in that corner, right next to the refrigerator hanging on the wall. Right underneath the light switches, I have a fire blanket. So if someone's clothing were to catch on fire, we could actually wrap them in that. And that will actually, do you want to just go grab it? Because you probably want to finish your notes, don't you? Forgot about that part of it. And so you could wrap them in it. Or if there were to be a pot on fire, you could throw the fire blanket over top of that as well. Go back to kindergarten when you learn stop, drop, and roll. That concept is still very important. And then you're supposed to check your smoke alarms. Change the batteries out 2 times a year. When would that be? What are those 2 times? You do something else in your house. You got to walk around, do a couple things. What? Daylight savings. When you change your clocks back and forward, you're supposed to also change your batteries and your smoke alarms. And smoke detectors should actually be changed out about every 10 years or so, because they just kind of eventually, the technology goes bad and all those things. If you were to get a burn, make sure that you run that underneath cold water, and any ointment that you put on it has to be a burn cream. So if I burn myself and I took just normal like Neosporin or an antibiotic and rub that on there, it actually traps the heat in and makes the burn even worse. So it's got to be very specific to burns. Now, I told you guys earlier as we started this semester, I've only ever had 2 fires. The first one was one of my first years. They were making green beans, hopefully one of the same first recipes you guys will be making. And I was standing in the kitchen, and what had happened was the kid went to the kitchen. He put his pan on the burner. He turned his burner on. He went and measured all of his things. He came back and he had 1/4 of a cup of olive oil. And as he poured it into the pan, it literally went to a 3-foot flame because the pan was so hot. You never want to have a dry pan and a hot pan. That oil barely touched it. We had a 3-foot flame. I turned around to grab the flour because I happened to be standing there, came back, and it was gone. The fire was gone. Thankfully, it was 1/4 of a cup of oil. If it was more, we would have had a bigger flame and much longer. It was a matter of seconds. So make sure that you never turn that stove on with any burner on, nothing in the pan, all of those things. Then the next one was here in this particular classroom, we were making soup. So it wasn't anything that I would have been too concerned about, but the student had made chili and had spilt some on the stovetop. So she had grabbed a paper towel and wiped it up, but she just left the paper towel on the burner too long and it caught on fire. Okay, not a big issue. It could have gone out in a matter of seconds, but instead they were like flailing it like this, trying to break it out so it wouldn't get caught on fire. And they're giggling and laughing. It just took forever. And I said, you made chili. If you were 2 kitchens over that had made the potato soup that had a pound of bacon, that had all the bacon grease, any little part of that paper towel that was on fire that would have hit that bacon grease, we would have had a huge fire. So it was something small that could have gone very wrong if they hadn't been, needed to stay focused. When we look at prevention of falls, we want to make sure that we keep the floor as clean as we possibly can. If you've got to stand on something, please stand on a sturdy step stool, not chairs that especially have wheels, any of those things on it. We want to make sure that the floor is dry. So when it gets to the end of the lab and you're doing a lot of dishes and water gets all over the floor, please dry it up. And then yesterday, my interpersonal relationships kids were making stress balls with flour. And so there's a little bit of flour on the floor over there. That's actually worse than water. Because when your shoe gets wet and it dries off fairly quickly, then your shoe, you remember you hear the days when it's really squeaky outside because it was raining outside, your shoe eventually gets really, the rubber starts to work. But the flour coats the bottom of your shoes and it's like an ice skating rink on this floor. why I never wear heels. Because if I can't run a marathon in them, you're not going to wear them in my class. So make sure that you're very comfortable when we're walking and running around. Pick up all those things. When we head into the kitchen, none of our backpacks, none of that stuff goes over there. I'm a little concerned because we're going to have to somewhat eat in the classroom this year. Normally we have the table, so it was a little more conducive to eating in the classroom, but we got to spread yourselves out. If someone were to fall, we just want to keep them as still as we possibly can in case we can check them over, make sure there's no broken bones, nothing like that. I had one kid who passed out and he was like full on timber. He was standing at the sink doing dishes and stood up and just went straight back. And as he landed so like if this was the stove, his head was like cocked from landing on the stove, but he was like as straight as possible could be. And I'm like, oh, we could have multiple potential broken things and head and all that stuff. So we kept him on the floor till the nurse could come and actually check him over before, getting him up. Those electrical shocks, we just want to make sure that we're not standing in water or have wet hands when we're grabbing any electrical cords. Electricity loves water, passes it right through as much as we can. So no extension cords. Unplug the toaster before you gotta stick something inside of there. It never fails. Pop-Tarts always fall through, right? My daughter always has one of the two that always fall through. So she just knows you unplug the toaster before you put a tongs or anything in there to grab it. You just have open electrical in there and your fork or anything can go in there can easily give you a shock. Make sure when you're unplugging something that you grab from the end of the plug. Don't stand in the middle of the room with like the vacuum cord and just keep shaking it until it eventually comes out of the wall. It starts to ruin the end of the plugs. So when they just finished construction 2 years ago, I started class and I'm standing here and I had a kid who wanted to plug in his computer. So right over there on the wall where the fire extinguisher, there's a plug-in at the kind of halfway down the wall. And this kid went over to plug in his computer. And as he did it, you know how your outlets, your plugs have 3 prongs on it? One of the prongs was still in the outlet. So when he put his hand down there, he actually hit the metal piece sticking out. And we hear this big pop. And he jumps up and looks at me. And I'm like, are you okay? He's like, I don't know. I mean, he got a massive shock. And he's just standing there. And I'm like, if it was me, I probably would have peed my pants at that point because he was like, ah. And I'm like, well, leave it. Don't touch it. And I'm like, okay, it gets to the end of class. We have to take it. We have to unplug his computer at this point. So we did. And I called the custodians to come down. I'm like, you could see it still stuck in there. He comes down with the pliers and just grabs it and pulls it out. I'm like, dude, the end of your pliers was not rubber. So he got a shock too. I'm like, how dumb. How dumb are you for doing that? So we just want to make sure that we're just being careful as you're kind of pulling those things. If someone were to get electrocuted, do not touch them. You pass electricity. So if I were to grab your arm, that's an outsource where the electricity is going to come out your arm and that's where a burn's going to happen and it's going to flow through me. And now we're both going to be stuck and can't go anywhere. When you are electrocuted, let's just say if your hand is touching it, it'll tighten all those muscles so you can't release the grip that you have on it. We have to remove the power source, which I like. In here, I've got the electrical panels right over there, those big gray boxes. I can go in there and just basically shut the power off to lots of rooms. And that's exactly what I would do. Shut power off. If you don't know where the power source is at your house and you need to take someone off of them, you can take a dry towel and kind of twist it into like a rope and wrap that around their arm or around their body and pull them off. You could also take like a broom if it's wooden and be able to use that to kind of push them off, eventually breaking that source as much as you can. You do still need to call 911 and need to have them checked out because it depends upon how much electricity has been running through their body and how long it can have later effects on them. My dad used to work for Xcel Energy, working on the power lines, and he had one of his linemen that he knew of was replacing the washer machine at his house, and he got severely electrocuted and he was fine, was talking to everyone. They took him to the hospital and he ended up having a heart attack a couple hours later because his heart couldn't keep up with what had all happened with all the electricity that had flowed through. Okay. And then our last one here is we want to prevent as much choking as possible. So make sure that you thoroughly chew your food before you swallow anything. It's actually supposed to be like 24 chews, which almost like liquefies your food. Some of you like 1 or 2 chews, or if it's like at my house, macaroni and cheese goes down without being chewed. It just like goes in and down. Okay, you just have to be careful because you don't want to have to choke. You don't want to choke if not need be. When we're dealing with small children, we want to cut them so small that they don't have to chew it. So anything that's round needs to be cut into halves and into quarters. Little kids don't understand that concept of needing to always chew everything. So the smaller we can cut it, the faster it will just simply kind of go down their throat. And then we want to be able to know how to do that abdominal thrust. Okay. This is definitely life-saving. And it's a very simple thing that we can do. So if someone were to, at lunch is saying to you, I'm choking, don't touch them. Because if they can talk, there's air passing through. If they're coughing or if they're wheezing or what sounds like a whistle sound coming out of their mouth, they also don't touch them. Because what's happened is that the food is probably lodged, let's say 90% of the way. So they're panicking because they can't take in a deep breath. But if I were to do this abdominal thrust, I could actually finish lodging the food 100% in their throat. So you can only do this when it's lodged 100%. Yes, get them help, get them assistance, so they can eventually get it out, but they kind of have to do it on their own until they no longer are breathing, okay? So when we do this abdominal thrust, so food is fully lodged in the throat. We want to find where those ribs are, and we're going to take a fist. So they're going to stand in front of me. I'm going to take one fist and find right in that spot where they're underneath those ribs, and I put my other hand on the outside, and I'm going to pull in and up, all kind of at one motion. So the idea is when this food is stuck, we're taking the air in the bottom of the lungs and forcing it out, and as we force it out, that should shoot the food out. But if that food is halfway stuck, and we do this, we force that air out, we get the food stuck, we go back to try and do it again, there's no more air to push up. So that's why you kind of got like one shot with this. So you got to make sure you do it at the right time. And now if you happen to be by yourself at home and you were to be choking and nothing happening, you can use the back of the chair or anything where you can really basically catch a corner on, and you basically just throw your whole body over top of it. Same concept, trying to force that air up and out. We had last year, shortly after we had taught this in class, I was in the lunchroom with the teachers, and we were all talking, and all of a sudden one person's no longer talking, and they're starting to the eyes start getting really big, and I stand up, she stands up, and then all of a sudden she got one more cough out and got the food out, and I'm like, are you okay? She's like, I'm glad you were ready. I was ready to go do this, and she was like, everyone else had didn't even notice that she hadn't been talking for a while, and she had food that was completely stuck in her throat. So we just want to make sure always, especially with little kids, always watch them. You just never know what they can get, that food, anything that can get stuck on. It's not always hard food either. Like a lifesaver, think of a lifesaver, it's got a hole in the middle, right? Reason has a hole in the middle, so if you choke on it, you can still breathe. That's why they invented it that way and called it that. Okay, you have one assignment here.